welcome to everyone who is listening to, who is watching, who is witnessing humanity in the headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. Joining me is my main man. We are back this week after a 1-week hiatus. Mr. David Seaton, how are you, sir?
What's going on, my friend?
Man, I'm excited today.
I see.
For no particular reason other than I'm just glad to be back. This is our atmosphere. This is what we do. This is home. And I missed it because we were out last week. It was kind of a Veterans Day thing, and we kind of needed a break. But we are back, ready to go, and there's been tons to talk about, and it's going down today.
There's never a shortage of things to talk about in the Trump era.
Yes, in the Trump administration. I'm with you 100%. So we thank Donald Trump for that today.
Right.
And amazingly enough, he's only probably going to be 10-15% of what we talk about today, because we really got to get to it. So let's give you guys a little preview since you're tuned in with us. We are going to be dedicating this entire show to the discussion, to the topic of the issue of sexual harassment. We're going to talk about it from just about every angle that we can. I recognize, though, even a full hour dedicated to this is not enough. There'll still be things that we're going to leave on the table that we won't be able to get to today, but we're going to do our very best to cover as many topics and as many angles as possible. I would implore everyone that is watching us on Facebook Live to go ahead and make comments during the show. We will definitely be able to address them live. We have excellent guests today, Dave. Let me give you a preview, buddy. We have coming up in just a few minutes, Pastor Denard Newell. He is a lawyer and a reverend and pastor, and he's going to be able to talk to us from a political point of view and a religious point of view, because amazingly enough, we have to talk about it from a religious point of view just because of the Roy Moore admirers that I call them.
Admirers is a very
right. That's the nicest way that I can put it.
That's the kind word.
Right. These are people that are actually using scripture to justify pedophilia.
So Mary was 13.
Right. not that the Bible ever equivocally says her age, but
you know that we know that just from Orthodox Jewish history than we do from the Bible.
Right. So with that said, we have, again, an excellent guest in Reverend Denard Newell. Later on in the show, we'll be speaking with Martha Langland. She is the author of a book called Back Off: How to Confront and Stop Sexual Harassment and Harassers. And she's going to do a great job of giving our listeners some good, useful information that they can use to help get themselves out of these situations. Because we got to remember one thing in our framing today: sexual harassment happens to both men and women.
That is correct.
Right. So we have to remember that in our framing today, because we have the actor Terry Crews, who came out.
Right. His story was really out there.
It really was. And I believe him.
His story was out there. If you get a chance, Google Terry Crews and sexual harassment and look up his story. It's pretty deep.
Yeah, it is. So with that said, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we speak to Reverend Denard Newell. We'll be right back with Humanity in the Headlines. Thank you so much for listening today. Humanity in the Headlines. So Dave, let's get this out here, because we haven't had a chance to really introduce this kind of properly. The past 60 days has been absolutely dizzying, trying to keep up with all of these sexual harassment, as you say, allegations.
Right.
Everyone from Bill O'Reilly to actually Sean Hannity himself as well. When you look at the Fox News people, to Roger Ailes, who had been fired, O'Reilly's gone. Sean Hannity, from what I hear, was pretty close.
Exactly.
You look at Harvey Weinstein. There's tons of actors and producers, names that are well not just known but beloved. People like Ben Affleck, and I mean, you name it. And you've seen every type of response, from outright denial to attrition, to people saying, I am so sorry for what I did. We've seen it all. We've seen millions of dollars being paid out. We've seen hush money. We've seen just about every dynamic you can imagine. We've seen deniers that obviously have done something untoward. We've seen it all, and it has been really hard to keep up with. Is this just a trend, or what's going? Is this like a rooster coming home to roost, or what is this?
I think in every culture, when you have almost a kind of an awakening or a renaissance, there's really no way to dictate when it's going to happen or what's going to be the flashpoint that galvanizes people to have this type of an awakening. But for whatever reason, and I would venture to say that Donald Trump and the Access Hollywood tape that accused him and then him getting away with it really lit the fire under a lot of women. We saw that in the Women's March after his election, and people are just getting tired. I think it's just a random culmination of events that have just sparked women to just come forward, and now it's just gained momentum and gained steam, and we find ourselves where we are today.
Absolutely. Well, joining us today to help us make sense of this whole thing, to help guide us in this conversation, is a very special guest. David, I absolutely love it when we have homegrown talent. And today we've got some homegrown talent here, right? Chicago's very own. I'd like to welcome Reverend Denard Newell. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm doing very good. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm going to blindside you a little bit, Reverend, because I'm not sure if you remember me, but I remember you.
You know what? The older I get, the more I remember faces and not names.
Well, I'm stunned because you can't know that many Atibas.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So even when you introduce yourself before I went live, I was like, God, I think I know him.
Right. That was the Holy Spirit tugging on you, telling you, I know this guy. I'm a former member of Victory Cathedral. Full disclosure.
Okay.
Right. And this will bring it back into your memory really quick. I'm the guy.
Yeah, I got you now.
Excellent. So my producer called me this morning. He's like, yeah, I got this guest for you. His name is, and I'm like, wait a minute, dude. I know him. My man. So I know. So I'm saying all this to say, I know how qualified you are to help us today in this conversation, because I got a lot of questions for you. So we're gonna start. Let's start with Roy Moore right off the top. We have to start with Roy Moore. The first thing I'd like to ask you, Reverend, is, or attorney. He has so many titles. Is what was your initial response once you saw the Roy Moore allegations come out with 5 accusers in the Washington Post? We're up to 8 or 9, right? But initially it was like 5 accusers in the Washington Post. What was your initial response, your visceral response to that?
Yeah, my initial response was it's always, you know, one is enough, but when 4 or 5 come forth, and not only do the 4 or 5 come forth with their own stories that are very similar as far as the assault is concerned. Of course, there was a 16-year-old who really had more of almost an egregious sexual assault. But when individuals come forth and they all pretty much have very similar stories, and on top of that, they told individuals who are close to them about the event that happened, it really tends to lend toward their credibility that this is something more than naught that happened.
Right. You're speaking, and this is David. This is David Seaton speaking to you now. You're speaking about how these women not only came out with their stories, but they also contemporaneously shared these events at the time that they happened or years before coming out now. So it's like if I tell Atiba something, if something happens to me and I told him 30 years ago, and now 30 years later I come out with my story, Atiba is kind of my witness because he can say, no, he told me this story 30 years ago. I can't go back in time 30 years and lie about something, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Here's my question as I'm thinking about the Roy Moore story, and we've had several segments on Humanity in the Headlines where we talk about religion. And I'm listening to all of these pastors coming out. We had people that come out. We had people that came out. I forget the name of the gentleman who's down there in Alabama. He came out and said, he invoked Mary and Joseph.
And he was the auditor.
State auditor. He invoked Mary and Joseph, and Mary was 13. Then he invoked Zachariah and Elizabeth, the parents of John the Baptist, and the Bible says that Zachariah was old and Elizabeth was young. Is there a culture in religion that is playing a part in this? Because when you listen to the story and you listen to even Roy Moore's attorney, when he was on the MSNBC earlier this week, and he was talking to Ali Velshi, and he kind of implied, oh, you know how it is in your culture, younger women, older men get married, blah, blah, blah. Is there an undertone in religion that lets people kind of step back and give Roy Moore a pass? And is that a problem?
Well, first of all, I did see the MSNBC interview with the lawyer, and of course, anybody that knows Ali knows he's a sharp guy, and one, that he's from Canada.
Right.
So that whole thing was racist in nature. It is a hijacking, if you will, of the principles that Jesus Christ stood for. And so it's almost a placing of culture on top of Christianity. And I believe Jerome Ross, who used to be an Old Testament professor at Virginia Union University, he calls it whiteanity. So in a word, it masquerades as Christianity, and it uses some of the same language and nomenclature and text, but it is a pretext to almost push a certain agenda and to push a certain culture as being above others. So they can take the sacred text and interpret it in any way that they feel that justifies their position, but also solidifies their position as the status quo. So it is probably as far from Christianity as you could get when you justify some of the things that Moore is allegedly to have done to his victim.
And let's be honest. Let's just kind of address the elephant in the room in discussing this. And the elephant is, this is all political, because we know that these same people would not be espousing Mary, Joseph, and Jesus if it were a Democratic candidate that were accused of the exact same allegations. So if we could just take a moment then to talk about the partisanship of what we're witnessing kind of on both sides sometimes. And I am very hesitant to ever use that phrase, on both sides. But this is one of the few times that I've kind of seen it happen now that we've had allegations come out against Al Franken, and now with Roy Moore. Again, I'm not equating them because they're not the same situation. I will admit that. However, we still have seen Democrats kind of rally around Al Franken in the same way that, again, if were it a Republican candidate, I'm sure that they wouldn't do. If we could just talk about that partisanship for a moment and people's inability to put their partisanship aside to speak to the real issues.
You know what, and I agree. But see, the thing about it, when you talk about parties, I believe that parties have character and personalities or persona that they try to take on. And the personality or the persona of the Republican Party or the GOP is they have wrapped themselves up in small government and morality. So they come off as if they are the party of morals and that they occupy the moral high ground. It happens that's contrary to the position that they staked out. Then what happens is they circle the wagons and they make excuses and justification, and they deflect. Because if for the number of interviews and the number of individuals who have addressed this topic, always individuals from the GOP, they mention it, but quickly they pivot to Clinton. They pivot to something else outside of dealing with the situation that's right in front of them. So I tend to think that because Republicans claim that they're more moral than anyone else, it always hits them harder than it does the Democratic Party. Now,
right, the hypocrisy is more stark.
Say that again?
The hypocrisy is more stark when they do it.
Yeah, it is. And the funny, it's not only more stark, but when you look at who they say they are and what they do, it's a contradiction and an exercise in hypocrisy. You know, they say they're for the working man, but they're getting ready to pass a tax plan that's already passed in the House that raises taxes on middle-class America, probably maybe 8 to 10 years outside of the plan if it's passed. You know, they say they're for taking care of individuals, but then they take away 20 million people's health care. And so it's a lesson in hypocrisy to say that I'm one thing, that I'm about one thing, but then when you check their behavior, it's totally the antithesis of who they say they are.
This is David again, and I'm really drawn into this conversation. I want to ask you two biblical questions for those who are watching, for those who might be in that Christian end of the Roy Moore supporters. Let me ask you two questions, and I want you to put your minister hat on right now. What does the Bible say about pedophilia, and what does the Bible say about forgiveness? A lot of times on the Christian end in the Christian community, especially when we have these nationalized issues, the first thing you'll hear is, well, you heard from a lot of Roy Moore supporters. Well, even if he did do these things, those things happened 40, 50 years ago. He's had a body of work since then that's more important than whatever he did. So if he did those things in the past, I forgive him because I know the man that he is today. Application of the biblical principle of forgiveness, and again, to my original question, what does the Bible say about pedophilia?
Well, let me take the forgiveness questions first, because I think it's forgiveness, and then there's a process of forgiveness and reconciliation. And forgiveness is more about the individual that has been harmed than the individual who has perpetrated the wrong. So when we talk about forgiveness, but if you are going to ask for forgiveness, if you're going to be forgiven, then what happens is there has to be an admittance that some wrong has been done. So in the case where Roy Moore is concerned, it's like how can the forgiveness aspect begin, or the forgiveness process begin, if he's not admitting that he's done any wrong? And we realize that he's not done any wrong because I think he's from the standpoint, well, you can't prove it. You know, there's no, it's my word against their word. And then when you think about my word against their word, there's also this white male patriarchy that's operating to say that I'm more credible than they are. But when you talk about forgiveness, there's also a piece that I term is reconciliation. Zacchaeus is up the tree. He's looking for Jesus. Jesus says, come down, the forgiveness happens, but also Zacchaeus wants to be reconciled to the individuals who he has hurt wrong. So there's some type of compensation or remuneration for the wrongs that he has done. Reconciliation only is appropriate when you want to be in community with the individual who you feel that you have been wronged with. You know, when you look at in South Africa, they had the Truth and Reconciliation process, which means that Black South Africans sat in front of white South Africans, and white South Africans sat in front of Black South Africans, and they were able to have a very candid and painful discussion about the transgression that Black South Africans had experienced at the hands of white South Africans. And so when we think about forgiveness, yeah, the Bible does say forgive, and Jesus says forgive 7 times 70. But there's also some repercussions for the things that you do. And so what happens is white evangelicals, or the type that are supporting Roy Moore, they want forgiveness without consequences. And whenever you perpetrate a wrong on somebody, there are always consequences that the perpetrator and the victim has to experience. So when we look at that, yeah, God's going to forgive him because God is not a respecter of persons. However, there are repercussions for his actions because he has violated individuals that did not deserve to be violated and did not consent to the violation. Now, when we talk about pedophilia, if you see the thing that begins the slippery slope is now you're talking about in context. You're talking about a first century Palestine relationship between men and women, between families, between tribes, and you're trying to superimpose a 21st century ideal of marriage and relationships on a first century context. And to put it bluntly, it doesn't work. And so what happens is, and so whenever you try to do that, and whenever you try to use John the Baptist's parents, and whenever you try to use Jesus' parents, it doesn't work well because you're taking something out of context.
And I'm really glad that you said that, because that's going to lead right to my next question, because really what you're talking about cultural relativism. You're talking about, again, it's unfair to go back 2,000 years ago and use the norms and the rules and the laws of that time and try to apply them today to a different culture and to a different time.
And land.
And right, we're talking about difference in geography, difference in time, difference in everything. So let me play devil's advocate. What about the individuals who have come out, using your same example, what about the individuals who have come out then and said, hey, in the 60s and in the 70s, we were in a different time. There were different cultural norms. There were different things that were acceptable in the 60s and in the 70s than are acceptable today in 2017.
Well, the other thing is, because I think if I can get the tenor of your question, but now when we look at what has transpired before, and if I'm not mistaken, I think your question may be talking about the wrong perpetrated by white folks on black folks, Confederate statues. But so if we,
I'm talking about Roy Moore. I'm talking about Roy Moore being accused of being with a 14-year-old. 30 or 40, well, about 40 years ago. And you've had people who have come out and who have said, well, it was a different time in the 70s. In the 70s, it was okay for a 30-year-old man in Alabama to date a teenager. But now, so today, you fast forward to 2017, are we putting individuals from that time period in an untenable position because we're trying to judge them? We're trying to judge 1970s behavior with 2017 rules and norms.
Well, I'm going to disagree with your premise. Okay, for a 30-year-old man.
Well, no, we're just saying that's what his supporters say. What do you say to those supporters that say that?
But then they're trying to be revisionist because it wasn't okay then.
Right.
It's not okay,
exactly.
It's not okay now. And what they're doing in order to bolster their argument, they're trying to use biblical references to say, hey, listen, this has been okay since the beginning of time. And the short response is, no, that's wrong. And it was wrong when he was doing it. And it's also wrong that they try to in some way change the argument by saying, well, yeah, it was okay for us to do it back then, but it wasn't really okay for a 30-year-old man to date, a 16, 17, 14-year-old girl. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, well, culturally, and Roy Moore's attorney did this on one of the shows. Well, culturally, we're different, and it's like, no, you're not different. You want to be different, but that's never been accepted. In the other 49 states, and it's definitely not accepted in Alabama.
Right, and this is Atiba again, and I just like to kind of end the Roy Moore thing with two notes. one, everything that they're saying, we know that they wouldn't say again if it were a Democrat in the same position, and they wouldn't certainly say it if it were their daughter. that Roy Moore was meeting at the mall and so forth. But the other thing I'd like to say about this is Roy Moore definitely was not fit for the office well before any of this. It did not take this. Like, this should not have been the straw to break the camel's back for Roy Moore. The fact that he's even ascended this far, being who he is and what he's done, I think that says a lot about where we are as a country, and certainly about where we are in Alabama.
Well, and again, I'd like to get your take on this, Pastor. Minister, I'm sorry. But that's kind of what we're talking about. All of the other stances that Roy Moore took, were again part of that enclave, part of that subset of culture in Alabama. When he says gay people should be, gay acts or homosexual acts should be illegal, people down there agreed. When he came out and he said that there was
Ten Commandments at the courthouse.
The 10 Commandments at the courthouse, after the Supreme Court said take them down, he was of the position that that the Bible was
God is bigger than any court here.
The Bible should supersede the Constitution, which means we're a theocracy. We're not a theocracy. But the people in Alabama agreed with him. So I guess are we having a clash right now of law and religion in this country, especially since you have such a hard right fundamentalist group of Christians and evangelicals in this country who really, in their hearts, and I would even say on their lips, confess that they have no problem living in a theocracy as long as it's a Christian theocracy.
You know what? It's probably, to me, it's problematic because I think we're mixing fruit here. Because when he decided that he was going to not obey the law and leave the 10 Commandments up, then what happens is that there was a process that he had to go through, and he had to relinquish his position as the as the chief judge of the Supreme Court. So there was a process there. Although, for whatever reason, it was seen as a breaking of the law. Now, the question is he fit, to be, a national legislator? And again, regardless of what you and I say, our brothers and our sisters and the people of the great state of Alabama have to make that determination. But it's a very slippery slope because they are making that determination not based upon value, but they're making that determination based upon wanting to maintain some sense of power. I saw the governor of Alabama, and I was completely shocked. She said that she had no reason to disagree with the women, but she was still going to cast her vote for Roy Moore. Now watch this, the comparison, because she felt that the Republican Congress needed to have some important votes, and they needed that Republican representation to make sure that they maintain the balance of power. So when I looked at that, I said, okay, so she's saying that being in power is more important than adhering to your values that you say that you hold secure. Now, so what this presents is, it presents that she doesn't hold her values as much. They're not as important as maintaining a sense of power. So she and people like her can determine kind of the trajectory of where our society is headed.
I'm glad you said that. As this segment comes to a near close, I'd like to ask you this question, and this is Atiba again. When you talk about power being more important than values, do you think, because now that we've had time, and there have been articles, I'm holding one in my hand now that says Bill Clinton should have resigned. It was written by Matthew Yagalis of the Vox, and he basically made the case that we got it wrong in 1998, that Bill Clinton should have resigned because of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and that as a country we had a moment, we had an opportunity that we now missed, and that we might be, and he argues that we might be further along morally as a country if a Democratic House and Senate had forced their Democratic president to resign over that scandal. What would you make of that assessment?
You know what? And if you allow me a little leeway to say, and I'm just going to take you a little higher if you don't mind.
Oh, please. And do us a favor. Just speak a little bit louder or closer to the phone.
Okay. I said, I hope you allow me a little bit of leeway, because as the old preachers say, I'm just going to take you a little higher. And I may take you in a different direction, but I may come back to where the locus of your question is. But the thing that I want to address, because I think you're talking about the moral compass in America. And I got to say this as the son of a black woman born in Mississippi, and as a black man who is a lover and an appreciator of black women. Our black women have been experiencing sexual assault and rape in the most egregious ways since our forefathers and our foremothers landed on, as Maya Angelou says, is yet to be United States, since they landed. And what happens is, and so the rape culture that is prevalent now was established long before white women came forth and talked about Bill O'Reilly and Weinstein. And so what happens is, what we need to do is we need to go back and ask ourselves the question, when it was happening to black women, why were we either complicit or why were we silent? Because I think the locus of dealing with all this, we also have to deal with the degree that we help to bring this culture into existence. And I think at the beginning, it was like, oh, this is a watershed moment. It's a watershed moment, but it's sad, because I talked to a 75-year-old sister who was a two-time sexual assault victim, and she said she didn't feel sorry for the white women that had been assaulted, and the whole Me Too thing. And I was taken aback a little bit. So I just asked her why, because I always want to learn. And she said, because when it was happening to us, she said they were silent. Now I don't agree with her being silent, but I can understand her position, because why is it more important when it happens to you than when it happens to me? So as black men, as white women, we need to stand up and say that we have left our sisters hanging. And since we have left our sisters hanging, there's no time like the present to make sure that while we are standing up, we make sure that their stories are being told and that their hurt are being addressed. Now watch this, at other people's hands, but also at the hands of black men. And so when we talk about moral compass, you can't just get your moral compass a little right. You got to go all the way back, and you have to identify where exactly was the problem and try to correct it from that point forward, not from somewhere in the middle.
That is. I think we're going to end it right there. But let me just go ahead and just put an exclamation point on what you just said. Whether we're talking about rape culture, whether we're talking about drugs, whether we're talking about guns and violence, whether we're talking about poverty, we could, and the list goes on and on. To your point, when it happens in our community, it's our fault. It's not a big deal, whatever. But when it moves from crack to opioids, when it moves from inner city violence to bump stocks in Las Vegas, when it moves from, like you just said, when it moves from African American poor women being raped to white women being raped on the casting couch, now we want to have a national conversation, and now it's a national issue. We're gonna have to leave it right there, but we're definitely going to have to revisit this, and we would love to have you come back and help us dig deeper into this, because I'm sure this story is going to continue to evolve. Please tell our listeners and our watchers how they can follow you and where they can find you.
You know what? You can follow me. You know, I'm getting ready to plant a church in Chicago called Excel Church, doing church just at a different level. But also they can reach out to me on Facebook, because I'm going to start doing a lot of Facebook Live. I'm going to start doing a lot of stuff on how to be a better man. I'm really talking to my black brothers, so they can reach me at Facebook. That's Denard, Denard, Newell, Newell. befriend me, and let's just start a conversation about, one, how we can be better as a people, but two, how we can be better as individuals.
We thank you for joining us today on Humanity in the Headlines. And again, we will be back in touch with you soon.
I love it. And thank you guys so much for having me.
No problem.
Have a great weekend.
Great conversation. He ended it on really a really deep
profound note. Absolutely.
And I hadn't thought of it. In that lens.
Yeah.
Before now, but that's an interesting point.
Yeah. So we got to keep it moving because there's more I want to say, but I'm just going to hold my tongue. We got another amazing guest to bring on. We're going to give her a call right now. We're going to take a break, catch our breath. Thank you for watching Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back with Martha Langland. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So after that dizzying, fast-paced, insightful first segment, Dave, we're going to do it all over again, right? So I'd like to talk about this segment. What we like to do is kind of talk about kind of the Hollywood angle of what's been going on with sexual harassment, and we'd like to give our listeners some tips that they can have or stop sexual harassment. And joining us is someone who is, I could not find anyone more qualified. But let me tell you a little bit about this woman. Her name is Martha Langland, although she goes by Marty. I think that's so cute. And she calls herself the godmother of direct intervention. She is an economist, martial artist, so she will kick your butt. Past president of the DC Rape Crisis Center and author of the book Back Off: How to Confront and Stop Sexual Harassment and Harassers. She's an expert on workplace harassment, organized the first major citywide campaign to stop street harassment. This is in DC from 85 to 87, and developed the first effective comprehensive program for bus and subway systems to deal with harassment on public transit, now being applied around the world. Again, this is Marty Langland. How are you today?
I'm fine, and Akiva and David, it's terrific to be on the show with you.
Absolutely. We thank you so much for joining us. So we're just going to hop right to it. We just had a great conversation about kind of the political angle, a lot of the politicians. We didn't get into Al Franken like I wanted. But matter of fact, I think we have time for that now, and I'm sure you probably have some thoughts on that. When you saw the Al Franken story break with the picture and all that and all the detail that came out, because she gave quite a bit of detail, what were your initial thoughts about that?
You know, we have a pattern in this country and around the world of men in powerful positions, you know, whether it's in an industry or in government, thinking that like the king of the mountain and that they can access, you know, sexual, behavior with any young woman who's available. And it's all about power. It's really inexcusable no matter who does it. I'm really disappointed in Al Franken. But I'm disappointed in any man in power who stoops to do this, because it's just inexcusable.
Oh, go ahead, David.
This is David, and again, thank you for joining us today, Marty. I want to I kind of want to jump right off the top and get your opinion on this, because Atiba and I were having this conversation, and we purposely stopped ourselves from going too deeply before the show. But the three main people that we have in the news right now, and you could probably say a fourth, we've got Al Franken. We've got people bringing back up Bill Clinton and what he did during his presidency. We've got Donald Trump, and then we've got Roy Moore. And
Yep.
While all of them are guilty of or have been accused of indiscretions, my position is, and again, I'm really interested to get your feedback on this, is that there are degrees. We've got Al Franken, who did something that could be categorized as a bad joke or something in poor taste, but certainly something he shouldn't have done. We've got Bill Clinton, who was certainly a philanderer. You know, there were other accusations of rape, but really the only thing that he was really convicted, or that we know that he did, was, as far as the record, is that he had a relationship with a 24-year-old intern. Inappropriate, but again, you could classify him as a philanderer, I think. Then we've got Donald Trump, who's accused of actually sexually assaulting women, and then we've got Roy Moore being accused of pedophilia. So
that's a good summary, and it's a good snapshot of the range of behavior that harassers engage in. And again, there's this sense of entitlement that powerful men have that is really translates into abuse of women, and sometimes abuse of young men as well. And it is behavior that has to stop. What I'd like to talk about is what the rest of us, the good guys, can do about it, because I think that, well, number one, we change the culture, and it's essential that women speak up and that young men who are abused speak up. We need to break the silence. That's the first thing, and I'm absolutely thrilled that women are finding the courage, because it does take courage to come out and say what's actually been done to them, to tell the truth. Women have been silent way too long. But here's the other part of direct action. The good guys, the men who don't do this, have been silent way too long too. Any good guy can interrupt any harasser anytime. I think that the harasser's own buddies are sometimes our best allies in stopping this behavior. And that's true of all four of the guys that are in the news now. People knew what they were doing. Where the heck were the good guys? And so I'd like to talk about some specific techniques that both men and women can do, including the harasser's own buddies, to interrupt this behavior before it turns into something that's really just outrageous. Can we talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. And before you do that, let me just add this one point to actually bolster what you just said, because I'd read something and I forget where it was, but basically to further make your point, they were saying that whoever took the picture with Al Franken would be considered his Billy Bush. As Donald
exactly
Trump.
Right.
So you have to remember, because there was somebody there that could have said, hey, that may not be the best idea, or I'm not going to participate in this because it's wrong. And so it's about a culture. I'm going to quote, if you don't mind, Ezra Klein. He wrote a brilliant piece in Vox. He says, if you peer into socialist circles, libertarian circles, so left and right, tech circles, media circles, and construction trades, you will find men who have sexually abused women. America has allowed a culture of sexual abuse and harassment to flourish, and all of our industries and political parties exist within that culture. This is a systematic rot, not merely a few bad apples.
That's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. And I think what we need are some tools here. We need a toolkit for intervention, because anybody who sees any part of this or knows about it really has a moral and ethical responsibility to take action. If I saw somebody kicking a dog, I wouldn't walk on by. And this is just as bad and way worse than that. It can really derail women's lives, and it does. It's very destructive behavior. So here's some intervention techniques. One of the simplest things to do is to interrupt the harasser by naming the behavior. It's a specific nonviolent action technique. It comes out of a long history of civil disobedience action. How do you interrupt and disrupt the harasser's behavior? Simplest way to do it is a technique called name the behavior. You say out loud whatever the creep is doing. In the Al Franken case, you'd say, Al, step back from that woman. Your hands are on her. You're acting like a frat boy. Naming the behavior. And then the second part of that is you give a command. Cut it out right now. That's a simple intervention technique. Name the behavior, give a command. Notice you're not saying please. It's not a request. It's a command. It's firm. And it's classic nonviolent intervention. Here's another technique. Use another intervention tactic. You put your hands in a timeout T, like a referee, or put your palm up in a stop sign, and you just say, stop right there. That's not okay. What could be simpler? It's like 6 words. And any bystander can do it. Any bystander could do it. The harasser's buddies need to start doing it, because the days of silent complicity are over.
Are they really over? Do you think that we're now seeing a renaissance, so to speak, a change, an actual shift in culture?
I think we are, because women finally, like I said, have the courage to speak up, and I see good men asking, well, what can I do? So I've written an article for the upcoming issue of Ms. Magazine, lists 10 ways to intervene, and guys can do all of them. It's not just up to women to stop harassers. I think any male who has any kind of ethics or integrity, justice, needs to know how to intervene. So let's go through a couple more techniques. One of the low-key techniques is to ask the creep to explain. That's so interesting, Mr. Jones. Can you explain why your hand is on my butt? That's a classic question. There's no answer for it. The victim can do that, but it's hard. When you're in that victim box, you're feeling shocked and humiliated and really disempowered. And that's why bystander intervention is doubly important, because anybody standing by can say, knock it off. Another way to interrupt is to use a short ABC statement. It's just 3 lines. When you do A, the effect is B, and we want C from now on. And I'll give you an intervention technique if your boss pulls a Harvey Weinstein. Here's what you say. Put the penis back in the pants right now. Should we all practice saying that? You know, it's not like you can't name the equipment if he's got it out on public display. So I think that we need to use these nonviolent action techniques. They're all very principled, they're very ethical, and they're very clear. What they do is they interrupt the dynamics. They disrupt the harasser's agenda on the spot. And they get the victim out of that victim box, which is just a terrible place to be. I mean, being victimized by a harasser is just a really incredibly disempowering experience.
Wow, I'd like to talk about this aspect of it, because you mentioned it being all about power, and I took a few minutes in doing my research for today to list some of the Hollywood accused, and to list a few things. Let me just read it for you. And Harvey Weinstein, obviously, he's the most notable name. He's a producer. His net worth is $150 million. He's won Golden Globe Awards, Academy Awards, Tony Awards. He's been accused by dozens of women of sexual harassment or sexual assaults, including rape. He's been fired by the Weinstein Company. You have Josh Besh, who is a celebrity chef. His net worth is $8 million. He's been accused of by 25 women of sexual harassment. He stepped down from the company he founded. Comedian Louis C.K., he's worth $25 million. He's been accused of 5 women of sexual misconduct, and he's one of the few people that has actually apologized for his. He
and Al Franken have both apologized.
Exactly. So again, it goes on and on. Dustin Hoffman had been accused. He's worth $50 million. Again, he's won Academy Awards, Golden Globe, Kennedy Center honor. It doesn't get much higher than that.
That's right. These are all powerful men who have abused their power. And what's changing is that we now have tools to call them to account. And the administrative and legal remedies are very important, but they're difficult and they can take a lot of time, which is why I think that coming at it from a nonviolent direct action perspective really is the fastest way to change it. And using allies techniques, consistent group action by allies, anybody around, that's really effective. It can shut down the office joker. It can shut down a powerful man. Imagine if everybody around Harvey Weinstein or Louis C.K. had simply said, knock it off. We won't tolerate it. Imagine the consistent power of that if 50 people had said that to each of them. And, you know, sometimes intervention is as simple as opening the door. If you know that the guy's a creep, don't let a young intern or somebody who's applying for a job or somebody who's up for a promotion walk in that room by herself. Open the door. When I was a young economist in the federal government many years ago, I had a harasser. My boss kept propositioning me. And this was before we even had sexual harassment laws. And the remedy there was some of the good guys I worked with would just come and open that boss's door and lean up against the wall and say, I'm working on that project with Marty. Anything you need to say to her, you need to say to me. They got me through my first year as a government employee. It was really powerful. And so I'm a big fan of bystander intervention, of male intervention. And it's not a mystery how to do it. You know, you just need to speak up with something that's very clear and honest. Gandhi talked about the power of truth force. And what I see here is a toolkit that we all can use, speaking the truth and interrupting this behavior every single time. That's something we can do.
Excellent, excellent. So let me ask you this then, because you talked about some of the things that do work. Let our listeners know maybe some of the things that don't work and things that they want to avoid.
Boy. I'll tell you, silence doesn't work. Harassers, you know, just will carry on uninterrupted if you stay silent. A victimized position is something that's very common. Women are shocked when it happens, and silence is a normal response, but it's not effective. Another really ineffective response, I'm sorry to say, is to just spout off and cuss at the harasser. I mean, cussing them out feels good. You're not a helpless doormat like you are when you're silent, but it actually boomerangs. On the job, it can cost you your job. On the street, it can escalate into physical violence very fast. It's actually not a very effective tactic, and in fact, pretty much turns into some pretty bad escalation much of the time. So screaming back obscenities, yelling at the guy, cussing him out, not recommended. Doesn't work. The third technique that is sort of a classic victim response in these situations is simple avoidance. You know, you try to like duck out of the meeting if he's going to be there. You avoid seeing him in the hallway. Women cross the street just to avoid a group of guys on the corner who are going to yell at them. We do avoidance tactics all the time, and that's a real limitation on women's freedom. It really is a human rights issue that we shouldn't have to be ducking around these obstacles to do our jobs or just walk down the street. I mean, think about what could be a more basic human right than to walk down your own street without abuse.
Exactly.
And then go to your job and be able to do your job without worrying about abuse. So silence, avoidance, screaming back obscenities, cussing the guy out, those are the three classic failure tactics. And they all harm women. They all harm women. They don't work to stop the aggressor, and they make us look bad. Being a passive doormat, doing the avoidance games, or turning into a screaming crazy lady. None of those do anything for women. So we need tactics that really do work to empower women and to empower male bystanders. And people should not keep doing the failure tactics because we know they don't work.
Let me ask you this, because in the last 24 hours, we've kind of had something happen in pop culture where a former U.S. Olympic gymnast, she mentioned that she had been, sexually assaulted by the team doctor.
And he apparently has a long record of sexual misconduct with young female gymnasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just one.
He's now been accused by dozens and dozens of girls. So, but her teammate, Gabby Douglas, gave her advice to the effect of suggesting that, you know, she just has to dress nicer or less provocatively. And she's gotten a lot of backlash on Twitter for that advice. What do you make of that? What do you make of those assessments that when people tell women they shouldn't dress a certain way to avoid that happening to them?
I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It has nothing to do with how we dress. It really doesn't. There was a survey last year in Saudi Arabia where women wear the full head-to-toe burqa in public. 99% of women in Saudi Arabia report public harassment on the job and on the street, on public transportation. It doesn't matter what we wear. Harassers take advantage of any opportunity they have. All it matters is that we're female and we're available to them, and they think they're entitled to do this. It really is not about what we wear at all. That's classic victim blaming. There's no magic outfit that we could wear. If a woman covered head to toe in a burqa gets harassed, then we all get harassed, and that, in fact, is what happens. It's not about what we wear.
I guess to your point, David, Al Franken's accuser had on a military bulletproof vest, and it didn't stop.
There you go. There you go. It's not about what she's wearing, and it's not even about her being flirtatious or friendly or any of that garbage. That's really a crock, because it's about men deciding to engage in this behavior. And they are men who generally feel entitled to do it, powerful men, wealthy men, as you point out. And my question again is, where the heck are the good guys? Where are the bystanders? I mean, the woman with Al Franken, she was asleep. The guy who took the photo, whoever that was, they had a moral responsibility to take action. And nothing that we wear is going to work, but bystander intervention does work.
So it sounds like, I guess, and this is David, and again, thank you for joining us today with this conversation. And I've been listening to you and trying to process it, but it seems like at the end of the day, unless we get more female participation in making laws and enforcing laws and being judges and being part of the actual system, really it's just going to boil down to making these kind of social suggestions on how people should modify their behavior. But until there's actual repercussions for this bad behavior, it really isn't going to change, is it?
Well, I think that direct action can in fact get somebody suspended, fired, disciplined. So there are some consequences for the behavior, and you're right. We need to make this behavior something that's going to cost men who do it. There need to be real repercussions for them, and I think we're starting to see that. But I don't want people to think that legal or administrative remedies are the only tools, because there's a whole toolkit. There are 101 ways with direct action. And again, I'm a big fan of Martin Luther King and Gandhi in terms of the power of nonviolent direct action. And that's something we can do right now. Now, mind you, I would love to see more women in power, not just in the judicial system and the legal system in Congress, but in every corporation, in every organization, because this happens everywhere. And having more women in senior positions does make a difference. But what really works fastest is intervention. And we can all do that starting right now. So I challenge every listener out there to really think about not just whether you harassed somebody yourself, but whether you spoke up when it was going on, because that's our moral obligation, I think, as human beings. And there are 101 ways to do it. One of the things that I love about the direct action remedies is that, number one, we can all start doing it right now. And number two, it has a cumulative effect. It redefines the workplace culture. It denormalizes harassment as an accepted practice. If you're a bystander, speak on your own account. Don't just tell the abuser that Susie doesn't like it. Say you will take action. That's a moral decision on your part.
Right, and I think there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there is a part of the sexual harassment statute is that you don't have to be the person who's the object of whatever happened. You could be a bystander and be offended by what you witnessed, and you can file a complaint in a lot of states, right?
That is absolutely true, that bystanders, witnesses can report it, can help document it, and can help change it. And in fact, I would argue that the bystanders and witnesses may have more power, more economic security than whoever's being victimized. And that imposes a further moral obligation on us to speak up because we have more power to do so. We're not the targets. I don't blame people who are being targeted for feeling afraid. Of course they are. That's part of the harasser's power game. But the bystanders, we have no excuse. We have more power. We have more economic security. We're the ones who can break this game up.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, we could go on and on with this conversation. Unfortunately, time has been against us. But again, this has been very illuminating, to say the least. If you could let our listeners know how they could follow you, find you, get more information, buy your book, and so on.
The book, Back Off, How to Confront and Stop Sexual Harassers, is available on Amazon and any online book dealer. And I'm reachable through the DC Rape Crisis Center. You can always leave a message for me there and ask them to get that to me. And I want to leave our listeners with one last final intervention technique, which I just love. I use it all the time. It's called the all-purpose statement because it works in 100 different situations. Here's the statement. It's just 3 lines. And again, both men and women can say this. We can practice if you like. Here's the all-purpose statement. Stop harassing women. I don't like it. No one likes it. Show some respect. And if the harasser gives you any back talk, any sass, you just say, you heard me, stop dissing women. How simple is that?
There it is.
I think we can all say that. Stop harassing women. I don't like it. No one likes it. Show some respect.
Well, I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I will be buying your book for her.
That's a pleasure. Have her practice saying it to you so she'll know how to say it when she really needs it.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on, Marty. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you remained a friend of the show.
It's a total pleasure, guys, and I would be happy to see you continue this discussion. I'm so glad that you're talking about it because, again, men as allies are a real part of the problem and a real part of the solution. When men don't speak up, the problem continues. When men do speak up, they can stop harassers in their tracks.
There it is.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, that's it. We promised you an action-packed hour, and I hope we delivered. It was a lot of information. I hope there was some information that all of our listeners could use, put in your back pocket, and because we got to stop this culture. We've got to progress as a country. We got to progress as a people, and I hope that our conversation today was one step in the right direction. We will be back next week. As always, we want to thank our producer, Mr. Breon Jones, and we thank Earl Winfrey for this platform. We will see you next week on Humanity in the Headlines. Take care, everybody.